Sports. Tonight, my guest is the prop queen herself, Ariel Epstein from SportsGrid. Ariel, how's the night treating you?
It's going well. I don't think any of my bets started yet. Maybe they did. I have to check up on them. But I just ate dinner, and that was good. And after this, I'll probably have a glass of wine, so it'll be even better.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to hear your story tonight. This show is all about you, your journey into this industry. Let's get started. Where did your love of sports come from?
My love for sports came from my dad and my grandpa, separate sides of the family, actually. My mom's dad, grandpa, and then my dad, they just got me into loving baseball. When the Yankees ended up losing in the World Series in 2003, I really just felt something for the first time about something that wasn't myself. My dad's an Orioles fan, so he didn't love that I became a Yankees fan. He tried to get me to love the second baseman for the Orioles, Brian Roberts, but he was always hurt. My grandpa, on the other hand, brought me a Derek Jeter jersey, and that was it. That was the end of it. I loved Jeter. I became a huge Yankees fan, was a diehard. My homework was done by 7 o'clock every night. I was full force into every Yankees game. I called my grandpa after every Yankees win to say, "The Yankees win." We just
I
had
love
the
it.
best time. We went to all the games. Then I started to love football, and everything was just, the rest was history.
Absolutely. So I see a Ravens helmet back there. So you're a diehard Ravens fan?
Yeah, so it's funny, my dad's from Maryland, my mom's from New York. So the families are split on which teams they root for. My dad is a diehard Orioles fan, a diehard Ravens fan. My grandpa on my mom's side is a diehard Yankees fan, but he never really cared so much about any other sport. My dad just got me locked in on the Ravens. The Ravens defense was something that was so much fun to watch. They just were so passionate about the game. Ray Lewis, I fell in love with the way that he would pep his team up every game. So it was Derek Jeter in the Yankees and then Ray Lewis in the Ravens, and those are my two teams.
Absolutely. Who couldn't love Ray Lewis? Watching that Super Bowl win that one year, I had tears in my eyes seeing him win that and then retiring. It was an incredible experience. Were you at that game? Were you able to make it?
I actually was at the game prior. It was funny. It's actually a funny story. I was at Penn State for my freshman year of college. The Ravens end up going to the AFC Championship game in Foxborough. My dad calls me on a Friday and he says, "We have tickets on the 50-yard line in Foxborough. Wow. Can you get home?" And at that point, there were no buses back to New York for the rest of the weekend, and not, at least not in time to get home in time for Sunday. So what my dad did was he got me a car service from Penn State University Park, 45 minutes away to Altoona, which is where the Amtrak is. I took the Amtrak 6 hours up to Philly, 2 hours back down to New York, got home Saturday night really late. Sunday morning, Dad and I left for the game at like 5 a.m. It was a late game it was the last game of the day. And then we ended up going to the game. I came home, did the whole trip back. So I was literally home for about 40 hours or so. And my mom was so excited. She said, "Oh my God, you're home." I said, "Oh, not really." So then after that, my mom said, "Yeah, you guys are not going to the Super Bowl. You will watch at home." So no, I was not at the Super Bowl, but I did get to watch them clinch to go to the Super Bowl.
Absolutely. That would have been fantastic. Now, how did you get into this industry? Because this is normally a male-dominant industry, and you're making such waves. You're a role model for all females in this. So how did you break into it?
I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. I broke into the actual sports broadcasting industry back when I was junior, senior in high school. I started to do a lot of just radio for my high school. I would write for the newspaper. Then I went to college. I went to Penn State for 2 years, and then I went to Syracuse for 2 years. Studied broadcast journalism in school. Did a lot of the television news stations for the students that we had, like student-run TV and radio stations. Hosted a lot of shows. Did the local newscasts. All part of the student-run stuff, not legitimately professional. And then I got the opportunity to do internships. So I interned for the New York Yankees, which was my big one. And that was the coolest summer of my life. It was going to college, and I got to meet everyone that I aspired to be, everyone I looked up to, every athlete that I ever wanted to meet. I got to meet them and interview them all. Then I ended up going after college, graduated in 2016, and I worked in a local news station professionally in New Bern, North Carolina. That's kind of where I got my start professionally on air, and I was able to just go and do a sports segment in front of a top 100 market, which was really cool and a lot of like learning experience. I got to go and cover games. I covered everything from high school to the Carolina Panthers. So I got to see all different levels and got to cover all of them and meet all these different players and different people from all over North Carolina, which was a really cool experience. But if you would have asked me when I was 9 years old and established this dream of being a sports broadcaster, if it was going to be in sports gambling, 9-year-old Ariel would not have thought it would have been sports gambling that would have helped to launch her career. Sports gambling just kind of fell into my lap, and it couldn't have been more of a perfect match for me. I was unemployed in 2019. I knew gambling was going to be up and coming. No one was really doing it yet except Kelly. And I just said, this seems like a niche. I know it. I don't know it that well yet, but I know props. I know fantasy sports. I could take my fantasy sports and bring it into the props market, which was still relatively new because Jersey was the first one to give you all these different options when they legalized mobile sports wagering with FanDuel and DraftKings. So I was able to go and take the props and fantasy, combine them, and that's how Prop Queen happened because everyone was doing money lines and spreads and teasers and parlays and totals. I said, you know what, I'm going to do what no one else is doing. I'm going to take props and I'm going to own the props market. That's kind of how everything unfolded.
Well, I definitely love what you're doing in props. Was your family big into prop betting? Like when you guys sat down and watched a game, was your dad making any of these bets?
So when I was watching the 2000 Super Bowl between the Ravens and the Giants, it was my family party, and the family always had these list of prop bets that it was not established on like an internet thing. It was just something that we created, and it was a Word document, and you printed it out, and everyone circled what they wanted for the Super Bowl prop bets. So that was the first time I heard of like prop betting. But when in my family, we live in New York, so we weren't really gamblers. We were more fantasy players. So my dad played fantasy sports. I started playing fantasy sports in 6th grade. I was in a friend league for 2 years, and the boys kicked me out because I won 2 years in a row in fantasy.
Of course they did, yeah.
Yeah, 6th and 7th grade. Then my dad established a family league, so I was able to at least play fantasy that way. I would be doing random drafts on ESPN or whatever, doing just different fantasy leagues with random strangers. And then eventually I ended up back in leagues with my friends when they matured a little bit. So we did do a lot of fantasy in this house. My brother, who's only 14, he plays. My dad plays. My cousins play. My uncles play. Everyone loves fantasy sports. Gambling was still pretty new to the family, but they absolutely embraced it. I know some people are against gambling still. My family took it in full force, head on. They said, we absolutely love this because the industry loves our daughter, so we're going to love it too.
Oh, I'm so glad you have that support from your family. That's fantastic. Now, do you have any stories about like your favorite prop bet you've given out?
So my favorite, which did not hit, it lost, but it was my favorite moment, was in the Super Bowl this past year. And anyone who watches my show knows that Devin White has a special place in my heart, the linebacker for the Buccaneers. He had one of the best playoff runs I've ever seen of a defensive player. He had at least 10 tackles in every playoff game that he played in, including in the Super Bowl. He was 100-1 to win the Super Bowl MVP this year. I just said, if it's not going to be Tom Brady, it's going to be a defensively minded game because it's probably going to try to be low scoring. Tampa Bay has the best run defense in the league. Devin White has had at least 10 tackles in every playoff game. If Devin White has another 10 tackle game, he's really in the mix to win MVP. Yeah. Unfortunately, the game wasn't close, so Tom Brady ends up winning it no matter what. Yet if you look at who really was the better player in that game and in the playoffs, it was their linebacker, Devin White. And if the game was closer, Devin White had the game-sealing interception. If that was a close game and he sealed the game with an INT, at 100-1, that should have hit. So even though it lost, it's still the bet that I feel I've handicapped the best of my life, because if it's not Tom Brady and it's some average quarterback, or even if it's a close game and it is Tom Brady, Devin White should have won. Absolutely.
Well, I love that you went against the grain too and didn't just go with a prop bet that everyone was looking at. So hats off to you for that. What advice would you give to the females coming up in this industry, the young girls that are looking at you and watching you day in, day out saying, I want to be just like Ariel? What would you tell them?
I would tell them work really hard. I live by the Derek Jeter quote, where you may not be the best at what you do, but no one can ever say they work harder than you do. And that's how I like to approach life. no one could ever tell me they work harder than me. If you question my work ethic, I'll probably never talk to you again. And I will also probably cry myself to sleep. Anything else you can rip on me. I don't care.
Yeah.
Just don't tell me I have a bad work ethic, because I will be really confused. And the other thing, which kind of goes hand in hand with that, is have thick skin, because you're going to have people who are going to tweet mean things at you, especially when we were talking before the show about being a female. People always hold females to a higher standard in a sense. Like, you have to know more than a boy. You have to know, you have to prepare more than a guy, because the truth is you never played football, or at least most likely you never played football in your life, which means that if you're going to sit there and handicap a football game, you better have a lot of information in order to say to the viewer, yeah, listen, take this bet. And the viewer, that's always my goal when I give out bets, because in the gambling space, that's what everyone wants. When I give out a bet, the viewer most of the time will say to me, wow, I cannot believe that didn't hit. You'll get them tomorrow. That's because I give so much information that you cannot question if this bet should hit. That's why the next day a lot of people say, oh, do you get a lot of flack on Twitter? Say, not really, because I just try to sound really smart when I talk, and I try to give you a lot of information. I don't just come out here and say, hey, take this bet because I smiled when I said it.
Absolutely. You definitely have to back up your bets, and I see you do that all the time. Tell me more about your role at SportsGrid and the shows that you're doing there.
So all year, I host a show Monday through Friday called The Morning After. It's 9 a.m. to noon Eastern time. Sirius XM channel 204, the Mightier 1090 on the West Coast, a bunch of streaming services. Here in New York, you can watch it on MSG Plus as well from 9:30 to 11. I also, during football season, I co-host a show called Pro Football Today, which is from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern time. We break down every single game. We also have Dr. David Chow, ProFootballDoc.com. He comes on, he gives us all the injury updates. We usually have him on right as all of the actives and inactives are being announced. He'll come on, he'll break down injuries. He'll tell us, which players we should be targeting in the props market if they are or aren't feeling at 100%. And those are the things that we like to do on Pro Football Today and on The Morning After, which is, again, Monday through Friday, every day of the year, every weekday of the year. We talk about everything. I mean, it's not just one sport. It's everything that's relevant. What I love that we do on The Morning After is we take everything that you would hear in sports talk radio and we bring it into the gambling world. For example, Carson Wentz. When Carson Wentz was announced out 5 to 12 weeks with that bone spur in his foot, instead of just saying that and saying, oh, this is bad for the Colts, this is going to hurt their season, that you should start looking at, the Titans, I think they win. No, it's called, hey, well, the Colts were favored to win the division at plus 110. Now the Titans are at minus 135 to win the division after the Carson Wentz injury. So we take the same thing that you're listening to on normal talk radio. We're just going to add gambling terms to it, which is what I love about what we do. And we have a ton of guests. We have a guest each hour. So you don't have to just hear me and my co-host, Ben Stevens. You don't just have to hear our perspectives. We have so many guests that know so many sports, even sports that Ben and I aren't really that good at handicapping. We'll make sure that we bring on a guest to talk about it.
Absolutely. And you definitely bring fun and life into your shows. It's not boring, you guys. You're not going to listen to a show of someone talking stats and analysis for that whole time, because I know a lot of us think that when we think about betting shows and gambling shows, the old boring standard. How have you brought your personality into the show? Because your personality is bright and shining in it.
Oh, thank you. So it's funny. The reason that I didn't love local news is because when I was a sports anchor in local news, you had your 2.5 to 5 minute segments where you're just going through highlights. You're just getting through the segment. You're reading off a teleprompter or you're reading highlights. You don't really have that much of an opportunity to go off script and just be yourself, especially because you're under a time restraint. Whereas with a 3-hour show, I have all this time where I can just talk. And I loved radio always. When I was hosting in college, when I was doing radio in North Carolina just as a side gig, I always loved radio because I always was able to show who I really was. Even though it took a lot of practice, because there's a professional way to do it. I have a broadcast coach, Jo Montgomery. She's amazing. I highly recommend her for anyone trying to get better on air. It took a lot of work, but I absolutely love what I do. And I think that passion has been something that's always shown through in me. Every interview I've been on, even if I didn't get the job, the one thing that the people always told me who I interviewed with was that they could tell that I'm passionate and to make sure I kept in touch, because they knew that my passion and dedication to what I did was going to make it. And that's kind of what's always stuck with me, is just, hey, let your passion show through. One time I got told that I have too much energy and I should tone it down. Then I got really nervous because that one person was a really big name in the business. I decided to tone it down, got in, not in trouble, but I had a few people say to me, hey, you okay? Are you depressed? What's wrong? I told them what happened. They said, why let one person dictate who you are? You can't do that. Just be yourself. SportsGrid's allowed me to be myself. I've never felt like I've had to be anyone else. They've never told me to be anyone else. They just let me be me. And for 3 hours, that's what I do.
Oh, well, I love that. I am so glad that you're able to be you and express it, because you're right. Your passion does completely shine through. Ariel, I won't keep you much longer. Can you just tell everyone where they can find you?
Make sure to go to @Ariel Epstein on Twitter, Ariel Epstein on Instagram. Also check out SportsGrid and SportsGrid TV on Twitter. We have all of our different videos 24/7. You can catch us on multiple streaming apps, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern time on the morning after with Ben Stevens and myself, SiriusXM Channel 204, the Mightier 1090. It's so much to remember. I could probably go on and on about all the places that SportsGrid's at, yet those are the main places.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I would love to have you on again. I wish you all the best in your career and all of your bets, Ariel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you.